to the evening check-in conversation with Edwina B, that's me, on the Free from Recovery Emerge Empowered in order to give others hope, help others prosper equally, using the 12 recovery principles that are modeled after the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I do not represent Alcoholics Anonymous, but I have been a member for the past 30 years. Yes, to God be the glory. And so I started this presentation or this conversation with you back on April the 1st. And so if you missed any of my conversations, please go back on my page and go back as far as April the 1st to see the beginning of my conversation with you on Free to Hope, 12 recovery principles that are modeled after the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was initiated by reading an article from Dr. Scott T. Allison, who wrote in the Psychology Today that we as a society can use the wisdom of the 12-step program during the month of April. While we're going through this worldly pandemic, that the wisdom from the 12-step program that I've been a part of for 30 years can help us get through, evaluate, discuss, communicate, keep a journal, and more importantly, using that serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay? So, I had started my free 2020 tour on my 30th anniversary, February the 23rd of 2020, where I was scheduled to go around the world to share how the 12 recovery principles can help you, and you, because in our literature it says all of us are ill to some extent, and all of us can use the wisdom from the 12 recovery programs of Alcoholics Anonymous and now recovery principles, okay? Whether it be from domestic violence, cancer, rape, incest, molestation, drug addiction, mental illness, suicide attempts, the whole 9 yards. And guess what? I've used the 12 recovery principles on all those issues because I experienced them all. And whatever comes down the pike, whatever is coming in the future, guess what? I'm prepared. I'm prepared because I'm going to use the same recovery principles that I used to get through all of them. But what good is it to keep that information to myself? No, it's not good. God did not deliver me from those challenges to keep all to myself. No, he set me free from recovery, emerge empowered, to do what? To give hope to you. Yes. So whatever you're going through, particularly through this coronavirus pandemic, but before that came about, we were dealing with our own other issues, weren't we? Oh, yes, we were. Death, cancer, domestic violence, child abuse, all those things. And in addition to that, we get this coronavirus pandemic. Woo! What's a person to do? Woo! So, I'm here sharing with you my experience, my strength, my hope, and my wisdom of how people in recovery have been prepared for things yet to come. Okay? And so, April the 1st, I started on Facebook Live. But I started doing actual presentations in February on my anniversary. I did one in Newcastle County. I did one in Kent County, and I was scheduled to do one in Sussex County. I was scheduled to go to Philadelphia, New York, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Georgia, Texas, L.A. I was going around the world to share how the 12 recovery principles can help each and every one of us. But guess what? That was my agenda but God had other plans. And so my presentation or my conversation with you may touch more people who I don't know who's watching. I see people saying hi, wave to you, but I believe in continuation, because if I start saying hi to everybody, I'm 64 years old and I might get sidetracked. So charge it to my mind and not my heart. I won't acknowledge you, but I will read your posts and your comments later. And so as a result of being in this process for 30 years with other people who have the same similar issues and some different, but we all have come together through the 12-step program to learn these 12 recovery principles to practice in all our affairs. And more importantly, to share them with others. So that's why I'm having this conversation with you. So I do an evening check-in just to kind of check in with you, because I know I gave a lot of information out this morning. And I don't know, it just seems to get better and better and better, every day. The Holy Spirit is just using me unbelievably. Yes, and guess what? Use me up. So, go back from April the 1st up until this morning to see all my conversations. And I think I have about evening check-ins for the past maybe 6 days. I'm not sure. But I will continue the morning session from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. and then the evening check-in from 7 to 7:30. Okay? So, you see that I am prepared for my morning coffee with my buddy, Billy Dandridge. And my cup with all my grandchildren on. I have coffee with Billy every morning. So I am going to say, Francine, if you're watching, here go our baby. Mwah. So I have coffee with Billy every morning. So, and then you see that I have my wig that I put on in the morning, because I put it on in the beginning just to show transparency, that we have to learn to take off the mask. So if you tune in the morning or you see the other ones, you'll see during that hour, I takes off the mask. And so now you're seeing me in my natural hair, and I love my hair. Okay? So, but I'm also surrounded by my ancestors. And this picture over here. And also my little sayings over here, free from recovery, emerging power to hope, help others prosper equally. And then, let me put you down. In the back of me, I got my mom, y'all. Y'all see my mommy here? So every morning, I do my dedication to my mommy. Yes. And through my addiction and recovery process, I told y'all what I couldn't do for my children, I now do for my 8 grandchildren. Yes, I love my grandchildren. Yes, I do. I love all children. So, because of the 12 recovery principles, they have allowed me another chance to get it right. See, man gives you a second chance, but God gives you another chance. Okay? So, I want to do check-in, because this morning I talked about and shared about my journey in doing the recovery principle number 1. That says we admitted we were powerless over, in my case, alcohol, and that our lives had become unmanageable. And I used the analogy of how we can use the coronavirus pandemic to kind of relate to what that first recovery principle is. We are powerless over the coronavirus pandemic, and our lives are unmanageable. Okay? And so I shared a little more in detail of how we all, as an individual, as a family, and even as the world, can benefit from the wisdom of recovery principle number 1. But I wanted to make it personal just to show you what I went through in order to embrace, accept, and utilize the benefit and the spiritual transformation that recovery principle number 1 has done in my life and will continue to do in my life. But recovery principle number 1 sets the foundation. You know what a foundation is, right? For all you builders out there. But it builds a foundation. And in recovery, we look at foundation a little bit different. Because we have to go deep. We have to go deep. Oh, yes. And so the way we look at building a foundation, which is recovery principle number 1, it says we don't look at the ground that we're building our foundation on. We look at the soil. Yeah. We go deep, deep, deep. So we want to make sure that our foundation is not built on quicksand. That makes sense? Yes. And so it's important for us when we get into recovery, when we have a made up mind, when we surrender only once. I'm a firm believer that when you surrender to whatever you're powerless over and you accept that your life had become unmanageable, like I did, you only surrender once. All those other times were preparation to that one surrender. That makes sense? And so this morning, I was able to elaborate a little more in detail how I came into recovery and what brought me into recovery, my mindset when I got into recovery, my attitudes, my ideas, and my behaviors, my perspective, my perception of recovery, and how all that changed. Thank God it did, right? And so I'm saying thank you, God, but guess what? I didn't always thank God because the God that I was taught was a punishing God. You a bad girl, he going to get you. And so it wasn't until I was delivered from underneath that parked car 30 years ago in the streets of Philadelphia that I cried out to this God to take me out this life or show me a better way. Okay, and so I shared about that this morning, and I shared about the rehabs that I went to. I also shared about Paul Bell and how he was a trick of mine, John, while I was prostituting, and he said he saw a diamond in the rough, and he thought he could fix me and get me off drugs and all that, but he found out that he couldn't. And then I talked about how every time I went into rehab for crack, I substituted crack for alcohol, or I celebrated my recovery from crack with alcohol with Paul Bell. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. But during that third rehab, I talked about how the seed was planted and how those counselors and my team of people, I'm going to say they tricked me. Yeah. So you have to go back to this morning and hear how they tricked me. But they planted a seed. And I'm going to do the check-in with you to see how you were able to unravel what I talked about this morning, and also how you were able to identify, maybe relate. Yes. And so they planted the seed by getting me to tell my own story. And when I told my story about my pattern, every time I picked up a drink or a drug, they asked me what happened. And so I was able to share what happened every time I picked up a drink or a drug, And so started with a thought. I entertained the thought. I got dressed up. I looked at my money. The money ran out. I started selling collateral. The collateral ran out. I started prostituting. I was too funky, too tired, too sore to continue. When I couldn't do that, I started stealing. Yes. And then they asked me, do you think you're powerless over alcohol and your life had become unmanageable? And once I heard myself tell myself the truth, I said, you damn right. Yes, I am. Then they also told me to put my hand in front of my face. You think you know everything? You think you know this? You think you know that? Nobody know about you? She said, what do you see? I see my hand. What do you see? I see my hand. She said, as long as you have your hand in front of your face, you'll never get the help that you need. If you put your hand down, the 8 of us can tell you what you can see, what we can see, and you can begin to heal and get the help. Wow. That's what planted the seed. Even though that third rehab, I did not stop. Okay, and I'll continue part 2 tomorrow. I don't want to give it all away right now. But I do want to share briefly before I leave, after I check in with you, the first article that I wrote for the News Journal, where it talks about will can win over drug use. And that will meant the will to live. Okay? So, with that being said, let's do a check-in. How was your day? I can't hear you. What did you do today? Huh? Did you go outside? Did you take a ride? Did you thank him? Did you remember to thank him? Mm-hmm. Did you ask what his plan was for you for today? Or did you have an agenda without checking with him? How did it come out? What happened? What worked? What didn't work? What did you think about our discussion this morning? Did you identify what your addiction is? I told you we are all addicted to something. Oh, yes, we are. We are creatures of habit, and we are addicted to something. Yes, we are. See, addiction doesn't have to be necessarily negative. It can also be positive. I'm addicted to God. I'm addicted to recovery now. I'm addicted to this new way of life. Yes. Mm-hmm. We are creatures of habit. I was and used to be a hustler for the devil, a prostitute for the devil, a thief for the devil. Now I'm a hustler for Christ. See what I mean? So what was your addiction? Chocolate, caffeine, soda, milkshake, cookies, I don't know, work, sex, cell phone, Facebook, drama, chaos, violence. What are you addicted to? And more importantly, those negative addictions, we can determine by asking ourselves how and in what way did they make or are making our lives unmanageable. Are we not sleeping? Are we not going to work? Are we not taking our hygiene seriously? Are we not being responsible? Are we not being accountable? Am I spending all the money? Am I lying, scheming, conniving to get what I want to support my addiction? Am I hiding things? Am I lying to people? Like where I've been, what time I got there, what's in my pocket, what's in this, what's that? Is it making your life unmanageable? Or do you say, like I said, oh, I'm just going through a little something, something? Well, for me, that was 14 years of going through a little bit of something, something. And I always interject here with Richard Pryor. When they say, man, you've been smoking crack a long time. You got a problem. He said, no, I ain't got no problem. The guy said, well, man, how long you been smoking? He said, 15 years. That's not a problem? Bless his heart. But I can relate. I have empathy. I understand. Yes. Because most of us in addiction, we think we can control it. We think we can manage it. And they say in recovery that the moment you think you have to control something, you are already out of control. That makes sense? You got to control something? You are already out of control. And so we learned that in recovery. And so this morning when I talked about me admitting that I was powerless over alcohol and drugs and that it had made my life unmanageable. Yes, it did. Yes, it did. So all those things that I just described to you, I did. Yes. And when I told myself the truth and I told myself what my pattern was and I heard myself tell myself the truth, that's when admitting is very, very important, because if you don't get it out, you're playing ping pong in your head. Now, I was a ping pong champ too, right? But what I'm saying is that in order to get a relief, in order to begin to heal and address and acknowledge and accept your powerlessness that's with that inside you and eating you up, you need to expose that. And so it's not easy to do that because most of us don't want to admit that we're weak. We don't admit that we were beaten. Ego and pride want to say, don't tell nobody. They're going to think you're a chump. No. Guess what? In another book, where the 12 recovery principles came from, it says every knee is going to bow and every mouth is going to confess that he is Lord. Yes, yes, yes. So I don't know what your knee-bound experience is or going to be in order for you to confess with your mouth. See, confess, admit. Woo! See, I didn't know none of that. And so one of the things that I want to share with you before I end tonight is a little bit of this article, because when of my experience, strength, and hope and wisdom with doing recovery principle number 1 and setting the foundation that has been unshakable for 30 years, one day at a time. My sponsor, before she died, she had 56 years. Her sponsor had 90 years before she died. Because we realized the importance of what 1 hour give us, and going to our little 12-step meeting, our support group, gives us the basis to live the other 23 hours. Why? Not to drink, not to drug anymore, because drug and alcohol is only mentioned in the first recovery principle, but the other 11 steps are a psychic change steps. They are psychic change steps. They are the spiritual transformation of why we picked up in the first place. So that's why it's important to admit that which you are powerless over and acknowledge how your life had become or is unmanageable. But you have to get it out of here first. You have to expose it. You have to admit it. Regardless of how uncomfortable it is. Because with that knee-bound experience, either you're going to save your face or you're going to save your tuchus. I thank God that I hollered out underneath that parked car 30 years ago for him to take me out this life or show me a better way. That I was set on this path to recovery and introduced to a 12-step program that allowed me to be prepared for things yet to come. Yes. And so that's why I suggested y'all keep a journal. This is my journal that I wrote the first 4 years in recovery. I've shared some entries throughout this series of conversations I've had with you. I read about, I shared with you about the fears. I even shared with you the letter that my daughter wrote where she told me to kiss her, you know what? And that prompted us to get into counseling. Okay? And so it was through the 12 recovery principle, but recovery principle number 1 that set the unshakable foundation for me. All those other times that I thought I wanted to stop, and I used those foxhole prayers. I kept a reservation. I wanted to substitute, like I shared this morning. I wasn't an alcoholic. I was a crackhead. In denial about my alcoholism, right? But after I did my pattern, after I talked about the process, alcohol was the first drug I was introduced to. Alcohol was needed when I was on crack and I needed to come down. If it wasn't alcohol, it was NyQuil. If it wasn't NyQuil, it was vanilla abstract, anything with alcohol in it. And we hear some people who drunk perfume, rubbing alcohol, anything with alcohol in it to come down from that crack. Yes. And so I had to pray to God to remove my reservation. How am I not going to get high off of something? He revealed to me, you want to get high, but not off of that. You want to get high off of me. I was like, yeah, okay, if you say so. But he was right. I'm high off of him. Oh, yes, I am. Woo! Can't you tell? And so by doing the first recovery principle, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. It set the foundation for me. And so tomorrow morning from 6 to 7, I'll do part 2 and conclude with recovery principle number 1. And from here on out through the 30th, I'll do a recovery principle. So the next one I'll do after tomorrow will be recovery principle number 2 until I get to 12, okay? Because I want to share my personal experience, strength, and hope, and wisdom on how I, like many others in recovery, but I'm only sharing my experience, my strength, and your hope. And when you embrace and want to utilize the 12 recovery principles, that'll be your experience, strength, and hope on how you utilize the 12 recovery principles and what spiritual transformation helped you. And so because all humans are ill to some extent, all humans can benefit from the 12 recovery principles. And each one, check this out. Each one of us that does the 12 recovery principle from 1 through 12, guess what's going to happen? One day you're going to share your story and someone is going to say, wow, she just shared my story. That's the hope, helping others prosper equally. That's what's going to happen. Because the principles say, I use them in my personal life, but I also share them with others to give them hope. Okay? So I want you to, again, tune in tomorrow for part 2. But I do want to read you my first article. This was written on September the 15th of 1996 when I had 6 years in recovery. And the News Journal, our local paper here, was soliciting stories or essays to share with the community. And it said, if you have something that could benefit from the community, please submit a 250 word essay to be considered and be placed on the advisory board, and also write articles. So what the heaven? I said, let me write something, okay? Remember, I kept a journal, okay? And I've been a part of the recovery process for already 6 years before I wrote this article. So I had an idea of, what to share, how to share, and basically just tell the truth. Just tell the truth. To thy own self be true, right? So let me share this article with you. It says, will can win over drug use. According to a government study, drug use among teenagers is on the rise. It is unfortunate that many individuals, particularly youth, have resorted to drug use. Although the reasons for using drugs are many, the ability to stop or refrain from using them requires 2 main ingredients: a desire for a new way of life and willingness to go to any length to accomplish it. As a former substance abuser, I feel compelled to share my experience, strength, and hope with you. I hope to prevent someone from picking up a drug for the first time, and inspire someone to choose a new way of life, and encourage those who have chosen a new way of life to reach back and help others. I was introduced to alcohol at a young age. To help make ends meet, my mother had parties where alcohol and food was sold. At one, I remember lurking in the background, watching the adults drinking, eating, and smoking while playing cards and seemingly having fun. When my mother's back was turned, I grabbed a cup and drank what was in it. It tasted nasty and made me gag. Nevertheless, I drank all of it. Shortly thereafter, I felt giggling and began dancing in the middle of the floor. The grown-ups surrounded me saying, "Oh, isn't she cute? Just look at her." What I remember most was the attention I received from others. However, I did not realize the behavior was brought on by the alcohol I drank. From that point, I associated drinking with having fun and being the center of attention. At age 8, I secretly began smoking cigarettes. By age 10, I began hanging out with girls whose parents had plenty of liquor in their homes. I experienced my first drunk at age 12 while visiting a friend. I decided, with encouragement from my friends, to taste all the different liquors stored in the cabinet. I fell down a flight of stairs, felt sick to my stomach, and vomited all over the place. But again, I remember having fun and being cheered on by friends. By 14, my friends had introduced me to marijuana. At 18, I was introduced to angel dust and black beauty speed pills. By 20, I was snorting cocaine. And at 25, I began smoking crack. By 28, I had become a full-blown crack addict. I lost jobs, material things, and most of all, I felt I had lost my mind. I had reached the point where I did anything to get drugs or money to buy them. I would have sold my soul if anyone had offered to buy it. I have been raped, beaten, set up, spit on, and called all kinds of names. I've had guns and knives put to my head and throat. By the grace of God, I escaped death many times. However, there were others who were not as fortunate. I became a disgrace to myself, my family, and to society. My physical hygiene was non-existent. I was emotionally numb and spiritually dead. Eventually, I became homeless, was helpless, and felt hopeless. I wanted to die. The last time I used drugs, I was consumed with self-loathing, shame, guilt, despair, and fear. During a split second of sanity, I made a desperate cry to God, asking him, take me out this life now or show me a better way. God has shown me a better way. I have not touched any mood-altering chemicals since, and I have been drug-free for nearly 7 years, but one day at a time. And this is when I was employed with the Wilmington Police Department, and they selected my essay, and I became a part of the News Journal Advisory Board and wrote more articles. That set the stage for me to share my experience, strength, and hope. So, in conclusion, I'm glad I shared this with you just to give you an idea of what my story is. I will complete part 2 of my recovery principle number 1, experience, strength, and hope, and wisdom, just to encourage you to maybe want to try out these 12 recovery principles, particularly during this coronavirus pandemic. And how they can help us with our present situation, our present state of mind, and even how grieving, Dr. Bailey just did a series on grieving, and how we are grieving individually, as a family, as a society, as a world. We are grieving because we don't know what's going on. Something is being taken away. We are being separated. We are being isolated. We can't see our loved ones. We can't bury our loved ones. We are grieving. And in addiction, we grieve the separation of drugs and alcohol, which we thought was our friend. Yeah. So, the 12 recovery principles can help you. It helped me, and it can help you. So, I will be back tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. to 7 on part 2 of my experience, strength, and hope and wisdom on the recovery principle number 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And I want you to be thinking tonight how we are powerless over this coronavirus pandemic, and our lives are unmanageable in some way, shape, form, or fashion. But I want to close with what you can use that I've been using that helps me. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. See you tomorrow morning. God bless.